Do you ever feel like a solitary creature living in a social world? We are building an online community that fosters virtual friendships. Hello, and welcome to Social Leopards. I'm Beth.
Hi, I'm Bea.
And we are here to collect and share stories and information in the hopes of finding positive and meaningful ways forward. It is our goal to navigate this jungle called life.
Who knows? Maybe a leopard can change its spots.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. This is Social Leopards, and I am Beth.
And I'm Bea.
Hey, and today we are going to talk about the things that stop us from being social. This is episode, I cannot believe it, 9.
Woohoo!
And so we go into double digits starting next week. I can't even believe that is true. That seems like it was a minute ago. But here we are, 9 episodes in. So want to start by saying, I think a lot of us know kind of deep down what we should be doing, right?
Right.
And yet a lot of us feel like something is stopping us from reaching our potential or being as social as we want to be. Lots of people want to do certain things and they just can't figure out how to get there, right? And I think many of us can agree that, what's up inside our brains makes sense and we can understand what the issues are even a lot of times. Sometimes we know what the root cause is, but the emotional side of us is really kind of getting in the way and it's the true barrier because, feelings are much stronger than intellect, right?
Yes.
And I think that this can prevent us from making real progress when we're trying to figure out kind of how to move forward, especially when it comes to loneliness or isolation or social anxiety.
Yeah, because feelings can overwhelm us. One of the things we do with the kids that I work with is trying to learn self-regulation strategies when they're young, because honestly, if you get too intense in an emotion, it actually does trigger the fight or flight response, which is it can be very negative and overwhelming. It starts, giving you too many, hormones. It gets too, overwhelming, and it can actually lead, if you keep doing that, to a lot of health problems. So definitely controlling those emotions is very, very important. Not getting too involved in the feeling and trying to figure out how to cope.
And what's that very first feeling that happens when you know that you're in a fight or flight type moment?
It's panic. There's a lot of, hormones that go in there, like we're just going to try to run away. We get a lot of adrenaline. And I remember this situation when I was a child. My brother had gotten sick, or actually he had an accident. And I remember the fight or flight response in the sense that I got so stressed. His little friend came running over and said, "Oh my gosh, your brother just fell off his bicycle." It was 2 blocks away. My parents were doing their thing. And I remember just oh my gosh, I have to ride. I have to run. I have to save him. And that was the panic, that fight of, I have to do that, and then just no matter what, I just had to go. And then I just remember getting him running back and just, yeah. And that's what I think when you're in an anxious situation, you're just oh my God, there's the panic. I have to run. I have to do something. And it may or may not be the right thing. That particular situation obviously is unique because I was just saving him. But, that's, I think, the same thing. We're just feeling so desperate that we're just reacting without thinking.
Oh, yeah. I'm all the images in my brain as you told that story. I'm it almost makes me a little bit anxious just hearing that story. Yeah. There's a lot of emotion.
And there was an emergency there. I mean, and I think that was a legitimate emergency, right? But when we're in a social situation, hopefully we're not going to react that way because it's not an emergency, but our brain could perceive it that way depending on what we're, Well,
does your brain really know the difference in the moment?
Good question.
Yeah. I know when I was going through grief therapy after my mom died, that was one of the things that they were talking to me about is that, sometimes it's hard to differentiate between different emotions.
Right.
And, you're very smart. You consider yourself intellectually adept. But when you're dealing with feelings, all of that goes out the window.
That's
because you
right.
feel what you feel.
That's right.
And there's no wrong way to feel,
Mm-mm.
so there's no way to fix it. You just have to live through it and work past it, or maybe that's work through it
Work through it,
and live
yeah.
past it.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. Like you talk about the feelings, like I think about people that are in the military, how some of them are so in control. We think they're in control and we see them with their feelings. And I think it's something you train yourself to do. But which, I mean, it's great. It's adaptive. But like so you have to kind of figure out, like, is this the time for me to really dig into my feelings, or is this the time for me to like control that so I can move forward? Like, it all depends, right? But if you do get too overwhelmed with the feelings, you're not going to function. You're going to make a decision that's probably not the best for you, right? So we have to figure out you have to be like in that happy medium state, like feel a little bit, but don't get overwhelmed. Easier said than done, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But when we're like anxious, like how do you, like sometimes I think, oh my gosh, why am I being anxious right now? Like what's happening? What is triggering this? So yeah.
Well, and it's hard to like stop yourself in
Yes,
those moments.
it is.
To stop and take the breath or think or talk yourself out of it because you're already there.
Yeah.
Right. So that's hard to control. It takes
is.
a lot of discipline, I think, and practice probably.
It does. And maybe like taking that break, like running into the bathroom, being like, oh, I'm going to just go in the bathroom for a minute and be like, okay, take a deep breath and come back.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good one. Yeah. I didn't think about it like that. So I'm taking a pause here to kind of let that sink in. Absolutely. I know we talk about isolation and social anxiety a lot, loneliness. We don't really talk a lot about depression and how a truly depressed person, how that can also impact things. And I'd like to get your thoughts on the role that has to play as far as, people who also suffer with depression.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying like the correlation between depression and loneliness, like why that happens? Well, I think there's a perceptual thing that happens with people that are depressed. Like they start perceiving everything negatively. So it's only going to make you more lonely because you're thinking everything is bad. Everybody hates me. And, when you're sad, you're thinking, the world around you is sad. So you are going to perceive everything as being negative. So I think then you're going to get more lonely and you're going to isolate yourself even more. So I think you have to almost like get out of that negative mindset to be connecting it with people. And sometimes that would take therapy. It would take intervention with medicine. But I've seen people, that I've worked with that they're just so depressed that depression kind of impacts them so significantly that then they're withdrawing. So in effect, they're making themselves lonelier because they're just not able to connect because of that depression, if that makes sense. It's like a vicious circle.
Yeah. And what about people who feel lonely even when they're around other people a lot? Because you always a lot of people perceive loneliness as I'm alone.
Right.
And unhappy about it.
Right.
Because you can be alone and love being in solitude.
Yeah.
But what about people who have family and friends or family and lots of social support, but they still feel lonely?
Well, I think it's a trust thing. I think that perhaps that social support, they're, not really trusting that the people that support them are really there for their benefit. They're just not believing that they're their friends or believing that they're maybe their enemies. Maybe they're projecting some kind of negative things on them. And I think that comes to confidence. If you're a confident person, then you feel like that you have a way of reacting in the world that's like, you have a good reason. Like something happens that's not positive, but you have a good, like, logical reason, like why it didn't happen that way, or it turned out differently than you thought, but it wasn't because of something you did. It was something that was external, right? But the people that are depressed and lonely, it's always an internal thing. Like that person rejected me. Maybe it was like that person was tired. That person was having something else going on in their lives and they didn't react to you the way you expected. But that person with the lack of confidence, which is probably the depressed person, assumes that you rejected them. And you maybe didn't even reject them. It was something was going on that was not even related to what they're doing. So I think that's the thing, that whole persona of like depression, loneliness is like a confidence issue. The lack of confidence impacts your perception of reality, which impacts your loneliness or perception of loneliness.
Yeah. So self-confidence and self-esteem
Yes.
really play a big part in the overall picture of your mental health. And
they do. Yeah.
When you don't love yourself, it's hard to love others, and it's hard to feel accepted.
Yes. I mean, there are other things too. Like I think people, and you've read this, I'm sure, people that have gone through the war, for example, like the Second World War, there were lots of studies with military people and families of military that said, you know, like they couldn't feel comfortable ever, even when they got out of the war situation, that they could trust that the people they met weren't there out to get them, because they grew up with bombs and, you know, trauma and like gas chambers, who knows? So like, it's the same kind of a thing. It's like, depending on how your environment is, like, is it a supportive environment? Is it a, you know, traumatic environment? Has someone taught you how to be confident? Has someone told you that the world is safe? Like all those things will impact your perception.
Right. And that kind of leads to like, why do we feel fear and why do we feel anxiety? And that is the fear of the unknown, or the inability to be okay.
Yes.
In the space of the unknown.
Yes, that's right. And trusting.
Right.
It's a trust thing. Like you just made, that's a good point that you brought up, the unknown. Like that's right. So you have to trust like that it's going to be okay. Even though we don't know, it should be okay if we trust, or we'll make it okay. But yeah.
Yeah. The fear aversion is a real huge barrier when you're trying to make progress, because if you're just more afraid than you want to make the change, that's always going to stop you.
Yeah.
And finding that strength to move forward in spite of.
What's the worst that can happen? So like, it doesn't work out the way I want, but I'm still going to try, because maybe it's going to be great.
Right.
And like, I force myself to do that. It's not something that's naturally something that I would do, but it's like, I have to do this. And you know, when you have children, I feel like that is very empowering. And like, you then are like, I'm this role model for these little kids, and I have to show them the way forward. And I feel like when I have my daughter, that was like an incredible moment. I thought, I'm going to be a different person. I'm going to be more mature and more empowered. And, you know,
right.
Sometimes it's not the same, but you know.
Right. And, you know, I kind of thought hard about fight or flight before we had started talking about this episode, and I couldn't come up with a like really good, I mean, I choose fight at work all the time, but I think flight, I think I am much more passive in my, rather than
the flight thing being
than passive. A flight thing being part of it. I don't know if there's a correlation there. I think I am the peacemaker. I would rather not have the conflict than be the conflict.
But it depends. Like if it's about your kids or your family, you're going to be the fight. If it's something that's not going to really impact you significantly, you're just going to be the flight. You know what I mean? Like choosing your battles. When do you actually take out the taser? You know, that kind of thing. When do you slash tires? Not kidding. I'm just kidding. No, I am kidding. You know, but yeah, I mean, that's like, you have to choose. Like when does it make sense to actually fight?
Well, and I mean, watch any of those afternoon TV shows, and I mean, I'll age myself by saying Jerry Springer, but I mean, like all of those people that just choose fight all the time instead of flight.
Right.
And so it can go one extreme or the other, right?
Right.
And, you know, my best friend's boyfriend slept with my uncle's best friend's daughter or whatever it is. You know, those things and everybody's yelling at everybody, and the security guards are suddenly on camera trying to like, you know, stop the fight that's happening, like the fisticuffs fight. And I just, of course, find all of that totally ridiculous.
Right.
But, and I'm sure a lot of it is just put on. They probably get extra money for starting a fight or something. I don't know how that works. But flight is always the easier answer in my opinion.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Right. And I mean, that can take a lot of directions, right? It can be literal or it can be figurative. It can just be backing down immediately and going into passive mode, or it can be walking away or
moving away. I mean, from some situation, like, I mean, you think about people that have a conflictual upbringing, family
Oh,
situation, and
yeah.
they move to a
Mhm.
college, let's say far away, because they want to repair that relationship or they want to get out of it. And, sometimes it works. Like, I mean, I think to myself when I was younger and, there were, when you're growing up, you have growing pains. And I went to graduate school outside of where I lived. And I will say that it probably helped the relationship with my parents because I got out, and it wasn't like a horrible relationship, but, everyone struggles, parents, kids. But then it could have been like worse where I just kind of ran away and kept running away from my problems rather than dealing with them. So it connected us a little bit more because we had some distance. But there are people that just like will run away and like they're running, running, running. And every time there's a problem, they're just going somewhere else and they're never fixing their problem. So it's just like that doesn't work either. So at some point, if you're going to choose flight, then you have to get help to figure out like, okay, I've gone somewhere else or moved somewhere else. And now I'm going to have to make peace with whatever it was that brought me here. So we can't, you know, fight's always going to have to be somewhere there in a different form because flight's never that adaptive. I mean,
Yeah. So you just said something that, like,
triggered something.
yeah. So you said make peace. So is that the word in the middle between fight and flight? Is it peace?
I think so.
Is it compromise? Is it, I mean, I've been sitting here, like, kind of niggling on this a little bit in my brain as we've
I
been
think so. I think
chatting.
that's a good point. I think it is peace to some extent. I mean, I think that those are two extremes, and I think we have to have something in the middle. As I said before, if there's a war going on, you're going to just choose to probably go away. You're going to protect yourself or whatever situation you're in. But I think peace would be a great one to
Right.
choose to kind of combine those two because those are two extremes.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we're going to talk about in a future episode, we're going to talk about kind of the pitfalls
Mm-hmm.
of loneliness and social anxiety, and this is kind of the precursor to that, just to
Mm-hmm.
kind of try to talk through what it is and the things that bring on the bad habits that start to develop over time when we choose one or the other. And I think
Mm-hmm.
both are not the right answer all the time. I think there's a time for fight and there's a time for flight.
Definitely.
And there is always, peace is
Yes.
always a good way, as long as I think, where I'm kind of like just trying to do some self-reflection. What if I'm always choosing peace in the middle and I'm never getting to resolution because I never fight and I never flight? I always just try to make peace. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that you can probably find pros and cons in every situation. And it's just kind of, and again, it comes back to know thyself, right?
Yes.
And be willing to find acceptance in the who you are. And then you're not feeling like you have to be so defensive, I think.
Right. And assessing the situation, like, okay, if you want to be concrete about it, growing up in a big city when I was a kid, right?
Yeah.
You had to pick, like, if you were going to be possibly, I don't know, I don't want to say the word attack, but in a situation where you might be not safe,
Mhm.
you're probably going to choose flight. You're just
Right.
going to get out of there, right? If there's a different situation where someone's like confronting you, you have to fight, So, I mean, it depends on what the context of the situation is. So we have to be aware of also our environment. Like, what is the, right response depending on the environment, depending on the people, and assessing that beforehand,
Right. So we've been talking about, social isolation and anxiety as kind of buzzwords almost throughout our podcast so far. And sometimes we bring up the before and after the pandemic. And
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that I'd like to just kind of like remind us all of as we're discussing this collectively is that, there are a lot of people that were struggling well before the pandemic was ever,
Yes.
a term.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I recently started thinking about is how much more impactful that isolation had on those people.
Mm-hmm.
And how that would have put them even, further into flight mode, right?
Yeah, that's probably true.
Yeah.
And
then, less stimulation, both
Yes.
socially and intellectually.
Yeah. And then, as you said, and even kind of convince them to not even want to socialize after pandemic because they got into a place where they could be comfortable not having to socialize, right? That was a protective place for them.
Yeah, and it was accepted.
Yes, it was for a while. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so it's hard to get back out of, and it's one of those, kind of bad habits that maybe we can discuss when we're ready with that episode. But I think also to kind of circle back to the earlier kind of topic that I posed to you on depression, when this isolation is a contributing factor, I would perceive that depression is much more prevalent, right?
Mm-hmm. I would think so, yeah. Well, that's what research will tell you.
Absolutely. And so if you're struggling with all of these things, it can probably feel pretty overwhelming just in and of itself. And if there's some sort of a combination in addition to, how you just regularly feel on a normal day, and what is your normal?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Can be very impactful. And I feel some of these things on occasion, not so much social anxiety, but I do feel depressed some days.
Same.
Still processing some grief. Sometimes I have some depression about just a certain situation that has arisen that I just can't seem to let go of, and I'll just, sometimes I don't know, sometimes I think it's just menopause, but
it could be. I feel like I have the same thing. So.
I'll just feel low.
Yes.
Down.
Yes.
Right.
For no reason. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, what's wrong with me?
Well, but I think we all cycle through, happiness is not a constant state. And I think people have to realize that that's not. It's moments. We have our moments of happiness, we have sadness, we have everything in between. But, wanting to be positive and happy all the time is a great goal, but it's a goal. So, it's a goal. So we don't have to worry if, we're not there all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm irritated most of the time, I'll say, and then I have to, think, of something happy, but I'm not sitting going, oh, I've woken up today and I'm so excited. No, it's okay, what am I going to do today? I have a lot of structure in my day like you do. And that keeps me going oh my God, I appreciate the fact that I can, wash the sink today and take a walk. I don't know, I appreciate the fact that I'm alive and we have great things going on, right? So then you say, I'm going to smile, and a reason to smile is going to come along. That is my mantra every day. And if you start smiling, something happens in your brain and you think about happy things. It's true.
Yeah, it's no different than, one of the things that kind of went around on social media was the gratefulness journals, right?
Yes.
And I think there's a month of the year or something.
That's right. Yes.
Kind of
I actually did one as well. We talked about, did we talk about that?
Is it November that they do that?
Maybe. I feel like we talked about that. Or maybe we talked about it
it's been mentioned, I think, a couple times.
But I did that for 3 months.
Oh, wow. 3 months.
During the time we had the first, shutdown, and we were at home, working from home. And every day, my coworkers and I sat there and we did 5 things that you're grateful for today. And then we did it. It's just, and we did the Happiness Project, and I feel like it helped to keep our spirits up because you're focusing on something else besides yourself, and that's the thing. Focusing on other things is a great thing because when we internalize too much, we get ourselves worked up because, we can't fix everything. We have to, sometimes things in our lives will never be perfect. I'd like to look like, Christy Brinkley. That's not going to happen. So I have to let that go.
So I planned a Kindness Rocks project. So it was either X or Instagram where I first became aware that people paint these rocks and they'll put some kind of a, I don't know, they can draw just a happy face.
And where do they put these rocks? Outside?
Random places where people.
For other people. Okay.
Happen upon them. You see a lot of the pictures on beaches and things.
Oh.
But hopefully not where they get dragged out to sea, where they're a little bit further up. But decided to do that as just kind of a feel-good project. And I think right now I have 11 people showing up at my house later on this month for that.
That's awesome.
And then we're going to go to local city parks and drop them there. And probably half of them will get picked up by random children who don't appreciate them. But, they'll be colorful and they'll make them smile and they'll be like, oh, look what I found. And
so in our office, to your point, it's not rocks. In the toilets, in the stalls, somebody has put some little Little sayings.
Oh, like on the
On the
bathroom
wall.
wall?
Yeah, the wall, yes.
I love
actually in
it.
the stalls, everyone can look there, like we're inside, like, oh,
Think happy while you pee.
Exactly.
I love it. Well, I mean, that took some forethought,
It
They
did.
had to think of what they were going to say.
They
And
did. And they rotated every month, so there's always a new one.
it's like on a schedule.
It's on a schedule.
That's awesome. I kind of like that though. So, feeling connected with other people, that's kind of like our jam, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when we're feeling lonely and or depressed or both, I think that comes at a cost.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you also have longer term social isolation, I know that that is even more dangerous for someone to be alone, not by choice, for a very long period of time. It happens a lot with the elderly.
Yes, it does.
But it happens with other people too. And I have read many a Reddit string where people are like, I just don't have any friends and I don't know what to do. And sometimes I'll respond to those people and I'll put little suggestions in there. And sometimes people are actually, even though they're not super unique, because I mean, if you listen to other podcasts that are similar to this, we're not creating rocket science. We're looking for it. We're hoping that a listener one day will give us something really super unique and different that they can share beyond what all of the popular psychology books and the self-help books and the motivation and the inspirational, encouraging books and poems and all that whatnot have to offer. But I think feeling not alone about being alone is really kind of the keys. And I don't know if I'm right, wrong, or otherwise. I certainly am not the do-all, tell-all expert on this, but I feel like I have encountered enough people and interacted with them over time that this is one of the common things that I've observed. So just saying it out loud. I've thought a lot about it, and I've talked to so many people. The reduced support that you get from other people if you don't have them at the ready is kind of really one of the roots of the tree, right? That keeps you in that spot, not having access to support or emotionally speaking, right? That we know, there are lots of ways to get it, but to feel comfortable seeking it is another story altogether. And it has a strong impact on how people just view life in general. And once it really starts to shift a person's perspective to the point that you start hearing responses from that other person that are like, I can't, I would never do that. I could never do that.
Right.
It really, it bothers me. And I want to fix it. I know I can't fix the people. You can't change people. People have to change themselves and they have to be ready for the change and they have to work on themselves and all that other good stuff, right? There's nothing we can do or say on this podcast that's going to magically change you. And I think that's where the fight or flight is. And I encourage you to find a little bit of fight in your life. We need to make sure that, kind of going back to this fight or flight that we were kind of focused in on earlier. Sometimes it's stress, right?
It is, definitely.
And the stress can be brought on by our personal fears, fears that are either real or imagined.
Exactly.
But they're real to us in the moment. However you're feeling in the moment is how you're feeling. And, I think there's a difference between it's okay to feel how you feel. And you have to differentiate that between it's okay to always feel this way about life in general.
Right. I agree with that. Yes.
And use it as your reason to not change. And so I think that's the sticky situation you get into because in your youth, maybe you were bullied. And that has a profound effect. And we hear many, many stories about people who are still struggling because of bullying that occurred. And luckily, in today's world, there is a lot of anti-bullying, protocols in schools. And it's talked about more frequently than it used to be. Your dad in the 70s, you say, toughen up, kid. And,
Exactly.
that was pretty much all there was.
You're right.
And you were left on your own devices.
Now we have cameras that will see if someone was bullied or not at school.
Right. But if you're not taught how to deal with any kind of stress, then it makes dealing with stress more difficult too, kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum. So in adulthood, though, it's kind of more of a passive-aggressive kind of thing where a person decides to challenge you. And sometimes it could be even a sibling or your parent still trying to treat you as if you're not an adult, or they're in this habit of treating you a certain way. And even though now you don't really need to listen to them, you feel some sort of obligation, or you're maybe still fearful of them for whatever reason, and they might still invoke some feelings of shame or humiliation because of the historical dynamic, right?
Right.
And so getting out of that and you can either fight by defending yourself in that moment and reminding that other person that you're not who you used to be when you were much younger. You are now older, wiser, and not going to take it anymore.
Right.
Or, you continue to escape that moment and choose flight. Sometimes that looks like just being quiet and refusing to engage, or sometimes it might mean, departing the room and physically getting out of the situation or succumbing to the humiliation, right? And just taking it. So how do we counteract that?
So positive self-talk is a great way to do it, right? Telling us that everything's okay and, you can get through this. You're okay. You're a great person. You're, whatever you want to tell yourself, right?
And just like I said just a minute ago, right? Like that was the old me. This is the new me.
Exactly.
And, I don't need to let my past dictate my future.
Exactly. We're writing our story almost like,
Right. And can you control how other people behave?
Cannot.
We talked earlier about taking a deep breath, gathering yourself, using grounding techniques is another good one we've talked about in the past.
Right.
Just really being in the moment and, that taking a breath is kind of a grounding exercise in and of itself to try to let go of the stress in the moment.
Yeah, and having a person to talk to is great. A close friend, that's always wonderful. A family member.
Yep. And, just maybe wait till those anxiety-inducing feelings have passed before you have that conversation so that you're more objective in the moment and can kind of reflect on it and gain something from that conversation. It can feel good to vent in a moment when you're feeling very emotional, but I don't think you get to any answers if you're trying to process something while you're super emotional.
That's probably true. Yeah.
And then, if you don't get the kind of support that you want from the person that you sought the support from and you didn't feel better or didn't feel support after that, then, by all means, look for someone else the next time because you need somebody who is going to emotionally, you need that best tier 3 friendship.
Definitely.
Somebody that you trust.
Yeah.
To not make you feel worse, to talk to, right? Right. And then, how you often think of the right thing to say, like
after. It's always after, right? Like I always think, gosh, why didn't I not think of that in the moment? And we just don't.
Right. Because why? Who I was thinking, or who was doing the thinking? The emotion, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a note to self every time it happens to me. And I mean, I'm not immune to that. I spout off. I had a kind of embarrassing moment at work last week where I made an assumption with some website and I shot off this email about this is wrong and this is wrong and this is wrong. Well, I didn't realize that there had been so many changes made that you had to actually click somewhere to get to what I was looking for. And it wasn't where I had expected it, but it hadn't actually disappeared. And I made this assumption in the moment that it had disappeared and went right into fight mode. Like, why did you mess with my thing? This is my project. And then they were like, no, it's just right over here.
Yeah.
This is actually an enhancement. And I'm like, oh, I felt a little foolish, but it would have been nice if I would have been notified prior And so that was my defense mechanism right
Mhm.
there. But, right into fight mode instead of assuming best intent or
Exactly.
taking the moment and say, what am I not seeing about this? And I would have seen that button right there,
Yeah.
but I didn't. I reacted. So
But everyone does that.
everybody does. But I mean, I'm just trying to I give a lot of good advice, but I think it's just important for us all to realize that no matter how much good advice you follow, it's not always going to be something that is successful in your life. We all mess up every day, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And everyone does.
Yeah, yeah. So, I think kind of my point of that is every experience is an opportunity to learn.
Yes, it is. And we should look at it that way.
Yeah, yeah. It transforms us if we want it to.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you, I'm a different person than I was 5 years ago, that I was 10 years ago.
Same.
And I like to think that, I'm evolving in a good way and in a positive way. I know that I wasn't always as empathetic towards the situations of others, and I didn't even give quite as much forethought to putting myself in the other person's shoes, which is a good way to stay empathetic, is to to stop and think, what is that other person going through? Because it gives you that empathetic, what's the word, advantage to think positive things about the person instead of negative things, right? It's so easy to just moan and gripe about somebody. I mean, that's more fun, right? It's it's kind of like a lot of people's go-to, and we need to probably try to just work harder at assuming best intent, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a lesson you keep learning over and over and over again for the rest of your life. You're never going to not be, there's never a time when you're going to be 100% on that one.
No, because we're all just, we think about things and analyze things,
Yeah. And when you get triggered, you get triggered. And sometimes that's the overpowering emotional response.
Yeah.
And, so I think the difference is in certain situations, who's going to accept that and see it for what it is and who's not. And again, that's one of those differentiators between who the people in your life are that are truly supportive and not. It lies because you know that even when you have your baddest self on, that you're still going to get love from the other person. Yeah. And so that's very comforting.
Yep.
It doesn't give you an excuse to just be bad all the time, because that's the easier answer. But at the same time, at least if you know there's forgiveness on the other end of the line, then, you kind of can give yourself a little grace, and the other person will give you that same grace. So, So, anything else before we go on to our sharing moment of the week?
I think we've covered a lot.
We have, really. So, this week, my question to everyone out there is, actually, this isn't for everyone. This is just for a specific subset of our listeners. And I know of a few of you out there, but I want to ask, because a lot of the conversations and some of the emails and interactions that I've had, people believe that they are the very large minority in a group of people who feel like they've never really had a close friend. And I'd be very interested in learning about anybody who feels like they've never really crossed that bridge into a deep, fully mutual trust and communicative, respectful friendship. And if you are someone who does feel like you have some barriers to creating deeper connections with another human being, we'd like to do a deeper dive in a future episode that involves the sharing of some experiences, both people who are still stuck and trying to find a way forward, as well as any stories of success where they felt like they had been in that place for a long period of time and overcame that challenge. And that way we can try to merge that with some of the fabulous tips that have been starting to trickle in, some of which we've shared with you, but I'm sure there are more coming, to share potential ways forward as a community. And Bea, how do they reach us?
You can comment below or visit us at socialleopards.com or send an email to at socialleopards.com.
Awesome. And that's a wrap.
All right, see you next time.
Take care, everybody.
This podcast sometimes discusses the struggles of loneliness, isolation, and depression in a way that can be triggering. Our content is not intended to provide or replace professional counseling. If life starts to feel too hard to bear, please seek help. In the United States, dial 988 if you feel as if you may harm yourself or others. Help is a phone call away. If you can't afford or find therapy, dial 211 for no or low-cost resources that may be available near you.